I never thought I'd be the woman standing in her own bedroom doorway at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, staring at something I couldn't unsee. The kind of something that breaks you clean in half. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped my purse. The keys were still in my other hand, cold metal digging into my palm. I'd come home early because my knee was killing me in those heels after the board meeting. Just wanted to change shoes, that's all. But what I walked into wasn't a quiet house with afternoon sun coming through the curtains. It was my husband Alfred in our bed with another person. And that person was a man, Bill Norris, his 25-year-old financial assistant, the one he'd hired 6 months ago to help with our investment portfolio, the one I'd made dinner for twice. The shock wasn't just what I saw. It was what I realized in that same frozen second. This wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. And I'd been played for a fool while I paid for everything. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. Just a reminder, this is a fictional dramatization for entertainment only. It's not professional legal, medical, or financial advice. Viewer discretion is advised. Enjoy the rest of the video. My name is June Smith. I'm 61 years old. I've been married to Alfred for 38 years. We built a life in a nice suburb 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of neighborhood where everyone waves and the HOA sends passive-aggressive letters about lawn height. I own 51% of Luther Corp., a mid-sized paper and pulp supply company my father started in 1972. Alfred owns the other 49%. That was the deal when we got married. My father insisted I keep majority control. At the time, I thought it was old-fashioned. Now I understand my father was protecting me from something he saw coming. Alfred never had money of his own. He came from a working-class family. Good people, but no wealth. When we married, I was 23 and managing the family business after my father's stroke. Alfred was charming, ambitious, and he told me he loved me every single day. What he really loved was the access, the company credit cards, the house, the country club membership, the respect that came with being Mr. Smith, husband of the majority shareholder. I thought we were partners. I thought 38 years meant something. But standing there in that doorway, I could feel the truth settling into my bones like winter cold. I'd been the bank, the safety net, the respectable wife who paid for his cars, his golf trips, his expensive dinners with business contacts. And now this. The man I'd trusted with half my company was in bed with someone young enough to be our grandson. Alfred saw me first. His face went white, then red. Then he scrambled for words like a teenager caught stealing. Bill just pulled the sheet up and looked at the floor. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My voice came out flat and cold. I said, "Get out of my house." Alfred started with the excuses immediately. It wasn't what it looked like. It was a one-time thing. He'd been confused, stressed, going through something. Bill was just a friend who'd had too much to drink at lunch. None of it made sense, and all of it was lies. I could see it in his eyes, the calculation. He was already figuring out his next move, how to spin this, what to say to make me forgive him and go back to normal. Because normal meant I kept funding his life. I turned and walked back down the hallway. My knee was still throbbing. I could hear Alfred behind me, pulling on clothes, calling my name. I made it to the kitchen and set my purse down on the counter next to the coffee maker. There was still coffee in the pot from this morning, gone cold and bitter. My reading glasses were somewhere upstairs, and I couldn't think clearly enough to remember where. The house felt different now, like it belonged to a stranger. Everything I'd thought was solid had just turned to sand. I heard Alfred coming down the stairs, his voice getting louder, more defensive. He was saying something about how I never paid attention to him anymore, how I was always working, how lonely he'd been, as if his affair was somehow my fault, as if I was supposed to apologize for keeping the business running, for paying the mortgage on this house, for funding his entire existence, while he did what? Betrayed me with his 25-year-old assistant. But here's what Alfred didn't know. Here's what he'd never bothered to learn in 38 years of marriage. I wasn't just the majority shareholder. I was the only one with signing authority on the major accounts. I was the one whose name was on the deed to this house, because I'd inherited it from my mother. I was the one who'd been quietly talking to our estate lawyer about updating the will after Alfred's spending had gotten out of control last year. He thought I was soft, thought I was old-fashioned and dependent, thought I needed him because I'd never been alone. He was wrong on every single count. And there was something else. something I hadn't thought about in 20 years. A phone number tucked away in an old address book in my desk drawer. A name I hadn't said out loud since before I was married. Mark Taylor. The man I'd loved before Alfred swept in and convinced me to choose security over passion. Mark had gone on to build his own law practice, corporate litigation. The kind of lawyer who knew exactly how to dismantle a business partnership when one party had been acting in bad faith. We'd run into each other at a conference 2 years ago, exchanged numbers. He'd said if I ever needed anything, really anything, to call. I'd smiled and said I was fine. I wasn't fine anymore. Alfred was in the kitchen now, blocking the doorway to the garage. His face was doing that thing where he tried to look wounded and apologetic at the same time. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. He said we needed to talk. He said this was all a misunderstanding. He said Bill had been having a personal crisis and he was just being supportive, and things had gotten out of hand, but it didn't mean anything. He said he loved me. He said our marriage was solid. He said we could work through this. Every word was a calculated move to buy time, to make me doubt what I'd seen with my own eyes. I looked at him and felt nothing but cold clarity. This man had been using me for decades, and now he'd been careless enough to get caught. I said, I want you out of this house by Friday. 3 days. That's what he had. Alfred's face changed. The apologetic mask slipped and something harder showed underneath. He said I was overreacting, said I was being dramatic, said I couldn't just kick him out of his own home. I corrected him quietly. I said, this is my house. My mother left it to me. Your name isn't on the deed. I watched that information hit him. Watched him recalculate. He shifted tactics, started talking about the company, said we were business partners, said he'd worked just as hard as I had to build Luther Corp, said I couldn't make decisions without him. I didn't correct him on that point. Not yet. Let him think he still had leverage. Let him think his 49% meant he had a say in anything that mattered. The company bylaws were very clear. Majority shareholder had final authority on all major decisions, including removal of officers for cause. Infidelity with an employee half his age definitely qualified as cause. But I wasn't ready to show that card. Not until I'd talked to Mark. Alfred left the kitchen, but he didn't leave the house. I could hear him upstairs, pacing in the guest room, making phone calls, probably to Bill, probably trying to coordinate their story. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. My hands were steadier now. I pulled up the company documents I'd scanned last month when we were reviewing the insurance policies, found the shareholder agreement, read through the clauses about fiduciary duty and grounds for removal. Then I opened my email and sent a message to Carol Jennings, our company accountant. Asked her to pull all expense reports for the last 12 months, specifically anything Alfred had charged to the corporate cards. Asked her to have it ready by Thursday morning. Marked it urgent. Carol was 68 and had worked for my father since the beginning. She'd never liked Alfred. She'd see exactly what I was looking for without me having to spell it out. The house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming. Outside, someone's dog was barking 3 houses down. A car drove past, tires hissing on the pavement. It must have rained while I was at the board meeting. I hadn't even noticed. My phone was on the table, screen dark. I picked it up, unlocked it, scrolled through my contacts until I found the entry I'd made 2 years ago. Mark Taylor, attorney at law. My thumb hovered over the call button. It felt like stepping off a cliff. Once I made this call, there was no going back to pretending everything was fine. No more smile and wave at the country club. No more playing the devoted wife while my husband made a fool of me behind closed doors. I pressed call. The phone rang twice. Then I heard his voice, warm and steady. June Smith. I was wondering if I'd ever hear from you again. I said, I need help. My voice cracked on the second word. Mark's tone shifted immediately, all business. He said, tell me everything. So I did. I told him about walking in on Alfred and Bill. Told him about the years of expensive dinners and golf trips charged to company cards. Told him about the house deed and the shareholder agreement, and the fact that Alfred had been treating the company like his personal checking account while contributing almost nothing to actual operations. Mark listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, you've got more than enough for a clean separation, both personally and professionally. But we need to move fast. If Alfred figures out you're building a case, he'll start hiding assets or claiming joint ownership of things that aren't his. Can you get to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m.? I said yes. He said, good. Bring every financial document you can find. Bank statements, credit card bills, expense reports, the shareholder agreement, the deed to the house, your will, his will if you have a copy, everything. We're going to lock this down before he knows what's happening. After I hung up, I sat there holding my phone, feeling something shift inside my chest. It wasn't quite relief. It wasn't quite anger anymore. It was something harder and clearer. Purpose. Alfred had underestimated me for the last time. He thought I was too old, too traditional, too afraid of scandal to do anything but suffer in silence. He was about to learn otherwise, but I also knew this wasn't going to be simple. Alfred had spent 38 years building relationships with people in our social circle, people at the country club, people in the business community. He was charming. People liked him. When this all came out, there would be gossip. There would be sides. There would be people who'd say I was bitter or vindictive or that I should have tried harder to save the marriage. I could already hear the whispers. But here's what I'd learned in 61 years. Your reputation isn't about what people say. It's about what you do when no one's watching. And what I was going to do was protect what my family had built and refuse to be anyone's fool ever again. That night, Alfred stayed in the guest room. I locked my bedroom door. Couldn't sleep. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak. Every sound felt amplified. Around 2 a.m, I heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard him pause outside my door. He didn't knock, just stood there for a minute, then went back to the guest room. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he felt any guilt at all or whether he was just strategizing his next move. Around 4, I gave up on sleep, went downstairs in my robe, made coffee in the dark kitchen. The house smelled like dishwashing soap and the faint ghost of last night's dinner. I'd made pot roast, Alfred's favorite. He'd told me it was delicious, kissed my cheek, said he had some paperwork to review upstairs. 3 hours later, I'd found him in bed with Bill Norris. The pot roast was still in the fridge in a plastic container. I poured it down the garbage disposal and ran the water until it was gone. By 9 a.m. Wednesday, I was sitting in Mark Taylor's office in a building downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and abstract art on the walls. Mark looked the same as he had 2 years ago at that conference. Tall, lean, silver hair, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd always been the smartest person in any room. That's what I'd loved about him, back when we were both 22 and thought we could change the world. He shook my hand, gestured to the chair across from his desk, poured me coffee from a carafe that was probably older than Bill Norris. Then he pulled out a yellow legal pad and said, "Walk me through the company structure first. Who owns what? Who has signing authority? How decisions get made?" I spread out the documents I'd brought. Shareholder agreement, articles of incorporation, company bylaws, the most recent financial statements, 6 months of credit card bills I'd printed from the online portal at 5 a.m. Mark studied everything methodically, making notes, occasionally asking questions. After about 40 minutes, he sat back and tapped his pen against the pad. He said, "This is even cleaner than I thought. You have majority control, sole signing authority on operational accounts, and clear grounds for removal based on misuse of company funds and the relationship with an employee. The personal side is straightforward too. The house is yours, you don't have joint credit cards, and Virginia is an equitable distribution state, which means the court looks at who contributed what. Given that you owned the company before marriage, and he's been essentially living off your income, you're in a very strong position." I felt something loosen in my chest. I said, "What do I do first?" Mark leaned forward. "First, we secure everything. I'm going to draft a formal notice of shareholder action removing Alfred from his position as vice president and officer of the company, effective immediately. You have the right to do that unilaterally as majority shareholder, and given the circumstances, it's justified. Second, we file for legal separation and eventually divorce. Third, we document every instance of financial misconduct, personal expenses charged to company cards, unauthorized use of company vehicles, anything that shows he was treating the business as his personal piggy bank. That becomes leverage if he tries to fight the separation agreement or claim he deserves more than he's entitled to." I nodded slowly. It all made sense. It was logical, legal, clean. But there was something else nagging at me. I said, "What about Bill, the assistant?" Mark's expression didn't change. "What about him?" I said, "He works for the company. Alfred hired him 6 months ago, put him on the payroll at $75,000 a year plus benefits. That's a lot of money for someone with minimal experience. Mark made another note. Was the hiring decision made properly? Did it go through the usual channels? I thought about it. Alfred told me we needed someone to help with financial planning and investment management. He handled the interviews, made the hire, never brought it to a board vote, just added him to payroll. Mark smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who just found the weak point in an opponent's armor. He said, so Alfred used his position in the company to hire his personal friend, paid him with company money, and never disclosed the nature of their relationship. That's not just misconduct. That's potential fraud, depending on how deep it goes. If Bill was being compensated for services he wasn't actually providing, that opens up a whole different set of legal issues. I felt cold again. But this time, it was a different kind of cold. The kind that comes with realizing just how long you've been lied to. I said, you think Bill wasn't really doing the work? Mark said, I think we need to audit exactly what Bill Norris was hired to do versus what he actually did. If there's a discrepancy, that's your leverage to terminate him for cause and possibly recover the money. The meeting lasted another hour. By the time I left Mark's office, I had a clear action plan. He was going to draft all the necessary documents, file the initial separation papers, and reach out to a forensic accountant he trusted to review the company's books. I was going to go home, pack up any remaining documents Alfred might try to access, and prepare for the fallout. Because there would be fallout. Alfred wasn't going to go quietly. Men like him never do. They fight, they manipulate, they play victim. But I had something Alfred didn't have. I had the truth, I had the law, and I had control of the money. Without me, he was just a 65-year-old man with expensive tastes and no income. I drove home through afternoon traffic, past strip malls and gas stations and the diner where Alfred and I used to have breakfast on Sundays, back when we were young. Hadn't been there in years, probably closed by now. When I pulled into the driveway, Alfred's car was gone. Good. I needed time alone in the house. I went upstairs to his study, the room he'd claimed as his office, even though he rarely did any actual work there. His desk was cluttered with papers, golf magazines, a framed photo of us from our 25th anniversary cruise. I opened the drawers one by one, found credit card statements he'd been hiding, receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, a stack of printed emails with Bill's name in the subject lines, took photos of everything with my phone. Then I went through his closet. Designer suits, expensive shoes, silk ties still in the packaging, all purchased with company funds or joint accounts I'd never monitored closely enough. My own fault. I'd trusted him to be reasonable, trusted him to understand that just because he had access to money didn't mean he should spend it recklessly. I'd been naive. By the time Alfred came home that evening, I was back in the kitchen, outwardly calm, heating up leftover soup. He walked in cautiously, like he was testing the temperature of the room. He said, June, we need to talk. I didn't look up from the stove. I said, there's nothing to talk about. You have until Friday to move out. He moved closer, tried to put his hand on my shoulder. I stepped away. He said, you can't seriously be willing to throw away 38 years over one mistake. I made a bad choice. I'm sorry, but we can get past this. Go to counseling. Work on things. I turned to face him then, looked him straight in the eye. I said, this wasn't one mistake. This was years of lying, stealing, and disrespecting everything we built. You charged personal expenses to the company. You hired your boyfriend and put him on our payroll. You treated me like an ATM machine while you lived your secret life. Alfred's face changed. The apologetic mask dropped completely. He said, you've been digging through my things, going through my papers. You had no right. I almost laughed. I said, I had every right. It's my company, my money, my house. You're the one who had no right. He took a step back, and I could see the gears turning. He said, I'm still a shareholder. You can't just kick me out of the company. I'll fight you. I'll take this to court. I'll tell everyone what you're doing. I said, go ahead. Tell everyone. Tell them how you betrayed your wife with your assistant. Tell them how you've been embezzling company funds for personal expenses. See how that works out for you. The word embezzling hung in the air between us. Alfred's face went red. He said, that's not what it was. I was using money I had a right to. I'm an officer of the company. I said, you were an officer of the company. As of tomorrow, you're going to receive formal notice that you've been removed from all positions, effective immediately. Majority shareholder decision. It's in the bylaws. You should have read them. I watched the information settle over him like a weight. He'd never actually read the company bylaws. He'd signed them 38 years ago when we got married and never looked at them again. He'd assumed his 49% gave him equal power. It didn't. Not even close. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the refrigerator cycling on, the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn 3 houses down. Alfred's voice dropped, got colder. He said, "If you do this, you'll regret it. I know things about this company that you don't. I have relationships with clients that you've never even met. I can make things very difficult for you." It was a threat, but it was also a bluff. I'd been running the day-to-day operations of Luther Corp for the last decade, while Alfred played golf and took long lunches. The clients knew me. The suppliers knew me. The employees knew me. Alfred was a figurehead at best, but he didn't see it that way. In his mind, he was essential. In his mind, I needed him. I said, "Do what you need to do, Alfred. I'm done talking." I turned back to the stove, stirred the soup, and waited for him to leave the kitchen. He stood there for another minute, breathing hard, trying to think of something that would make me back down. Then he walked out. I heard him go back upstairs, heard the guest room door slam. The soup was burning on the bottom of the pot. I turned off the stove and dumped the whole thing in the sink. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Around midnight, I heard Alfred moving around downstairs, heard the front door open and close, got up and looked out the window, saw his car pulling out of the driveway. He didn't come back until almost 4 in the morning. I heard him stumble up the stairs, heard the guest room door close. In the morning, he was gone before I woke up, left a note on the kitchen counter. Said he was staying with a friend for a few days, said we both needed space to think, said he hoped I'd come to my senses. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Then I made coffee and sat down at my laptop to check email. There was a message from Mark Taylor, sent at 6 a.m. subject line, "Documents ready for review." I opened it. He'd attached 3 files: notice of removal from corporate positions, petition for legal separation, preliminary asset inventory. Everything was spelled out in clean legal language. No emotion, no drama, just facts and consequences. Thursday morning, I met with Carol Jennings, the company accountant, in her office at Luther Corp headquarters. Carol was a small woman with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She'd been with the company since my father's time, survived 3 recessions and 2 ownership transitions. She set a manila folder on the desk between us and said, "You're not going to like this." I said, "Show me anyway." She opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets highlighted in yellow wherever Alfred's name appeared. Restaurants, country club bills, golf trips to Arizona and California, hotel rooms, car rentals, clothing purchases at expensive department stores. 12 months of expenses, totaling just over $120,000, all charged to company credit cards, all categorized as business development, or client entertainment, or professional development. Carol tapped one line in particular, a charge for $9,000 at a jewelry store in Richmond last July. I said, "What's this?" Carol said, "According to the receipt I pulled from the archives, it was a Rolex watch. Alfred submitted it as a client gift." I felt my jaw tighten. I said, "Did we give a watch to a client?" Carol shook her head. "No client received a watch in July." I checked. I also checked the other months. Most of these client dinners don't correspond to any client meetings on the calendar. Most of these trips don't match up with any business we were doing in those locations. I sat back in my chair, felt the weight of it settling in. Alfred had been stealing from the company for at least a year, probably longer, and he'd been doing it openly, confident that no one would question him because he was the founder's son-in-law, the vice president, my husband. I said, "How much total, over the last 5 years?" Carol pulled out another spreadsheet. This one was thicker, more highlighted. She said, "Rough estimate, based on what I can verify, close to $400,000, maybe more if we go back further or dig deeper into cash advances and reimbursements. $400,000, money that should have gone into employee bonuses, equipment upgrades, retirement contributions. Money that had instead funded Alfred's lifestyle while he pretended to be a contributing partner." I felt sick, not just because of the betrayal, but because I'd let it happen. I'd been so focused on keeping the business running, on maintaining stability, that I'd stopped paying attention to the details. I'd trusted Alfred, to be honest. That had been my mistake. Carol was watching me with sympathetic eyes. She said, "What do you want me to do with this?" I took a breath. I said, "Make copies of everything, one set for me, one set for my attorney. Then lock down all corporate accounts, remove Alfred's access to credit cards, company vehicles, expense reimbursements, everything. Effective immediately. If he tries to make a charge and it gets declined, tell him to talk to me." Carol nodded. She'd been waiting for this conversation for years, I realized. She'd seen what Alfred was doing and had been keeping careful records, just in case. Just in case I finally woke up. She said, "There's one more thing." She pulled out another document, a bank statement from an account I didn't recognize. She said, "I found this by accident when I was reconciling some old transfers. It's a personal savings account Alfred opened 3 years ago. He's been moving money into it from his salary and his profit distributions. The current balance is about $270,000. I stared at the statement. Alfred had hidden money. While I'd been paying for the house, the cars, the insurance, the property taxes, he'd been quietly siphoning off his share of the profits and building a nest egg I knew nothing about. He'd been planning an exit strategy. Maybe not this exact exit, but some version of it. He'd been preparing to leave me or to have leverage if I ever tried to leave him. The account was solely in his name. Joint accounts, he'd always told me, were too complicated. Better to keep things separate for tax purposes. I'd believed him. Another mistake. Carol said gently, "I only found this because he'd made one transfer from the company account to this personal account by mistake last year, and when I asked him about it, he said it was an error and had me reverse it. But it made me curious, so I did some digging." I said, "Does he know you found this?" Carol shook her head. "I don't think so. I only pulled it up this morning when you asked for the expense reports. But June, listen. If you're going through with a separation, you need to tell your lawyer about this account before Alfred tries to hide it somewhere else. Right now it's discoverable. In a week, it might not be." She was right. I took photos of the bank statement with my phone, thanked Carol, and walked out of her office feeling like the ground was shifting under my feet again. Every time I thought I had a handle on how bad this was, it got worse. Alfred wasn't just a cheater. He wasn't just financially careless. He was calculated, strategic. He'd been playing a long game, and I'd been too trusting to see it. I called Mark from my car in the parking lot, told him about the expense reports and the hidden account. He listened, asked a few clarifying questions, then said, "This changes the timeline. We need to file for separation today, not next week. If Alfred thinks you're building a case, he might try to move that money or claim it was always meant for both of you. I'm going to expedite the paperwork and have it served to him by end of business tomorrow. Can you get copies of those bank statements to me within the hour?" I said yes. He said, "Good. And June? Stop second-guessing yourself. You didn't cause this. You didn't let it happen. Alfred made his choices. You're just refusing to keep paying for them." After I hung up, I sat in the car for a few minutes, watching people walk in and out of the office building. Regular people with regular problems. Worried about deadlines and presentations and what to have for dinner. My problems felt surreal, oversized, the kind of thing you read about in advice columns and think, how did she not see it coming? But that's the thing about betrayal. It's invisible until it's not. It's 1,000 small moments of choosing to believe the best instead of questioning the inconsistencies. It's deciding that love means trust, even when trust isn't earned. I'd made those choices for 38 years. Now I was paying the price, but at least I was finally awake. Friday morning, I was in the kitchen drinking coffee when the doorbell rang at 8 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. Looked through the peephole and saw a man in a suit holding a manila envelope. Process server. I opened the door. He asked if I was June Smith. I said yes. He asked if Alfred Smith resided at this address. I said he did. He handed me the envelope and said, "Legal documents. Have a good day." Then he left. I stood there holding the envelope, feeling the weight of it. Inside were the papers Mark had filed yesterday. Notice of removal from company positions, petition for legal separation, preliminary financial disclosures. Everything we'd discussed, everything Alfred had been dreading. I set the envelope on the hall table where he'd see it the moment he walked in, then went back to the kitchen to finish my coffee. Alfred came home around noon. I heard the front door open, heard him stop in the hallway. Silence. Then I heard the envelope being opened, papers rustling. When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face was pale and rigid. He was holding the documents. He said, "You actually did it. You actually filed for separation." I said, "I told you I would." He threw the papers on the kitchen table, said, "This is insane. You're trying to take everything. The company, the house, the retirement accounts. You're claiming I misused company funds. You're demanding I repay $400,000. You're trying to destroy me." I kept my voice calm. I said, "I'm not trying to destroy you, Alfred. I'm protecting what's mine and correcting what you've stolen. If you hadn't been lying and cheating and embezzling, none of this would be necessary." He leaned against the counter, breathing hard. For the first time since I'd walked in on him and Bill, he looked genuinely panicked. Not sorry, but panicked. He said, "You don't understand what you're doing. If you push this, if you make this public, it's going to hurt both of us. People will talk. The business will suffer. Clients will leave. Employees will worry. You're being vindictive and short-sighted." I almost laughed at that. Short-sighted, coming from the man who'd risked everything for an affair with his assistant. I said, "People are already talking, Alfred. You made sure of that when you got caught in your own bed. Now we're just deciding how the story ends." He tried a different tactic, softened his voice, sat down at the table and looked up at me with something like desperation. He said, "June, please, we can work this out privately. Without lawyers, without courts, without all this public ugliness. I'll give you the house. I'll step back from the company. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't file the financial claims. Don't make me repay that money. I don't have it. You'll bankrupt me." And there it was, the real fear. Not losing me, not losing the marriage, losing the money. I sat down across from him, looked him in the eye. I said, "Where's the money, Alfred? The $270,000 in the account you thought I didn't know about?" His face went white. For a second, he didn't breathe. Then he said, "How did you—" I cut him off. "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you hid money while I paid for everything. You built yourself an escape fund while pretending we were partners. So don't sit here and tell me you're bankrupt. You have money. You just don't want to use it to clean up your own mess." He stood up fast, knocking his chair back, said, "That money is mine. I earned it through my profit distributions. You have no right to it." I said, "And the $400,000 you stole from the company, did you earn that too?" We stared at each other across the kitchen table. The afternoon sun was coming through the window, highlighting every line in his face, every gray hair, every year we'd been married. He looked old suddenly, tired and cornered and mean. He said, "You're going to regret this. I'll fight you on every line of these papers. I'll drag this out for years. I'll make sure it costs you more in legal fees than you'll ever recover." I said, "Do what you need to do. I'm not backing down." He grabbed the papers off the table and walked out. I heard the front door slam, heard his car start in the driveway, heard him peel out onto the street like a teenager. Then, silence. I sat there alone in the kitchen, shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline, from the strange exhilaration of finally standing up for myself after years of swallowing disrespect. My phone buzzed on the table. Text from Mark. "Papers served?" I texted back, "Yes, he's not happy." Mark replied, "Good. Angry people make mistakes. Let him bluster. We have the evidence and the law on our side. Stay calm and document everything." I set my phone down and looked around the kitchen, my mother's kitchen, the house I'd grown up in, the place where I'd learned to cook and laugh and dream about the future. Alfred had never understood what this house meant to me. To him, it was just an asset, a nice address, something to impress people. To me, it was memory and history and belonging, and I wasn't giving it up without a fight. Over the next 2 weeks, Alfred alternated between rage and manipulation. One day he'd send me long emails about how I was throwing away our life together, how I was being selfish and cold, how I'd regret this when I was old and alone. The next day, he'd try calling me late at night, his voice slurred from drinking, saying he loved me and missed me, and couldn't we please just talk. I didn't respond to the emails. I didn't answer the late-night calls. Mark had advised me to keep all communication in writing and only discuss logistics, nothing emotional. So when Alfred texted asking about the lawn service or the cleaning lady or who was going to pick up his dry cleaning, I responded with short factual answers. Everything else, I ignored. The company Grapevine was buzzing. Carol had quietly removed Alfred's access to corporate accounts, and when his credit card was declined at lunch one day, the story spread fast. People started asking questions. Employees who'd never liked Alfred began speaking up about incidents they'd witnessed, expenses they'd thought were questionable, times he'd taken credit for their work. It was like a dam breaking. Information I'd never known came flooding out. Alfred had apparently been having problems with the staff for years. He was dismissive, condescending, took 2-hour lunches while everyone else worked through theirs. He'd told one junior accountant that her ideas were cute but not worth presenting to real clients. He'd made inappropriate comments about another employee's appearance, nothing actionable enough to bring to HR, but a pattern of behavior that painted a picture. The picture of a man who thought he was untouchable because he was married to the boss. The board meeting was scheduled for Monday, the 28th of February, exactly 3 weeks after I'd walked in on Alfred and Bill. 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. Mark had helped me prepare a formal presentation, summary of financial misconduct, documentation of unauthorized expenses, bank statements showing the hidden account, witness statements from employees willing to go on record about Alfred's behavior. The goal wasn't to humiliate him. The goal was to make it clear to the other board members, 3 longtime business associates who'd known my father, that this wasn't a personal vendetta. This was necessary house cleaning, protecting the company from liability, ensuring that Luther Corp maintained its reputation and integrity. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd present the information, how I'd respond if Alfred tried to fight back or play victim. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and went downstairs, made tea, sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, reviewed the presentation one more time. Everything was documented. Everything was backed up. Everything was solid, but I still felt nervous. This wasn't just about business. This was about standing in front of people I'd known for decades and admitting that my marriage had been a lie, that my husband had been stealing from the company, that I'd been too trusting or too stupid or too conflict avoidant to see it sooner. It felt like failure. Even though I knew intellectually that Alfred's actions weren't my fault, emotionally, it felt like I should have protected the company better, should have paid more attention, should have been less naive. My phone buzzed on the table. Text from Mark, sent at 2:15 in the morning. "You still up?" I texted back. "Can't sleep." He replied, "Neither can I. Want to talk through the presentation one more time?" I called him. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He said, "You're going to walk in there tomorrow, present the facts, and let the evidence speak for itself. You don't have to explain or justify or apologize. You're the majority shareholder exercising your right to protect the company from financial and reputational harm. That's all this is. Don't make it bigger than that." I said, "What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm exaggerating or being vindictive?" Mark said, "Then they're not paying attention to the numbers. 400,000 in misappropriated funds isn't exaggeration. It's theft. And if any of them question your motives, remind them that you could have handled this quietly, could have just kicked Alfred out and moved on. But you didn't. You documented everything and brought it to the board because you respect the company and the process. That's leadership, not vindictiveness." After we hung up, I felt steadier, more certain. Mark had a way of cutting through the emotional noise and making things clear. It's why I'd fallen for him 40 years ago. And it's why I'd kept his number all these years, even though I'd told myself I'd never use it. Some people just have a way of making you feel less alone in the world. I went back to bed and managed a few hours of sleep. When my alarm went off at 6, I got up, showered, put on my best navy suit and pearls, looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, but I looked determined. That would have to be enough. The board meeting was at 10 a.m. in the conference room at Luther Corp headquarters. I arrived early, set up my laptop, distributed printed copies of the financial summary to each seat. The 3 other board members arrived one by one: Harold Patterson, my father's oldest friend and the company's outside counsel; Linda Morehouse, who'd been on the board since the mid-'80s and ran her own consulting firm; and David Chen, our largest client and a longtime supporter of the business. They greeted me warmly but cautiously. They'd all heard rumors by now. In a business community this size, you can't keep secrets. They took their seats, glanced at the documents in front of them, and waited. Alfred arrived exactly at 10, flanked by his own lawyer, a younger man in an expensive suit who looked like he charged $500 an hour. Alfred's face was set in a neutral expression, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched. He took his seat at the opposite end of the table without making eye contact with me. His lawyer sat beside him, opened a leather portfolio, and clicked a pen. The room was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of phones ringing in other offices. I stood up, took a breath, and began. I said, "Thank you all for making time for this meeting on short notice. I know there have been questions about recent changes in the company's management structure, and I want to address those questions directly and transparently. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that Alfred had been engaging in financial misconduct that put the company at legal and reputational risk. The documentation in front of you outlines 12 months of unauthorized expenses charged to corporate accounts, totaling approximately $400,000. These expenses were categorized as business development or client entertainment, but they do not correspond to any legitimate business activity." I walked them through the spreadsheets Carol had prepared, showed them the jewelry purchase, the golf trips, the restaurant charges at places we had no clients, showed them the pattern of behavior stretching back years, showed them the hidden bank account and the salary distributions Alfred had taken while contributing minimal work to actual operations. Harold Patterson studied the documents closely, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. Linda Morehouse's expression hardened as she turned pages. David Chen was making notes. No one interrupted. When I finished, I said, "Based on this evidence and in consultation with legal counsel, I exercised my authority as majority shareholder to remove Alfred from his officer position. I'm bringing this to the board now, not to seek approval, but to ensure transparency and to answer any questions you may have about how we move forward." Alfred's lawyer spoke up. "Mrs. Smith, my client disputes these characterizations. Many of the expenses you've labeled as personal were in fact legitimate business activities that simply weren't documented in the way you'd prefer. My client has devoted 38 years to this company, and your presentation makes it sound like he was some kind of thief. That's not only inaccurate, it's defamatory. Mark had warned me this would happen." Alfred would try to reframe the narrative, make it about documentation standards rather than theft, make me look petty or vindictive. I said calmly, "I'm not characterizing anyone. I'm presenting financial records. If Alfred has documentation showing that these expenses were legitimate business activities, I'd be happy to review it. Do you have that documentation?" Alfred's lawyer glanced at Alfred, who shook his head slightly. The lawyer said, "We're in the process of gathering that information. It will take some time." Linda Morehouse spoke up then, her voice sharp. "How much time? These records go back 12 months. If these were legitimate business expenses, the documentation should already exist. Receipts, meeting notes, client names. You shouldn't need to gather that information weeks after the fact." Alfred's face flushed. He said, "I didn't keep detailed records because I didn't think my own wife would turn on me like this. I trusted that we were partners." Harold Patterson removed his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief, and said quietly, "Alfred, partnership requires transparency. If you'd been transparent about how company money was being spent, we wouldn't be having this meeting." The room fell silent again. David Chen closed his copy of the financial summary and looked at me. He said, "June, what's your plan for the company moving forward? Are you going to continue as president and majority shareholder, or are you looking to sell?" I said, "I'm staying. Luther Corp was my father's legacy, and I'm committed to maintaining it. We have good employees, solid client relationships, and strong fundamentals. This is an internal management issue, not a business viability issue. With Alfred removed from operations, we'll be more efficient and more compliant with proper financial controls." David nodded, said, "Good, because if you'd said you were selling, I would have been worried. But if you're staying, I'm confident the company will be fine." That was the moment I knew I'd won. David Chen carried weight in the business community. If he believed in the company's future, others would follow. Alfred seemed to sense it too. His shoulders sagged slightly. His lawyer whispered something to him. He shook his head. The lawyer tried again. Alfred stood up abruptly and said, "This is pointless. You've all already made up your minds. You're taking her side without even hearing mine." Harold Patterson said mildly, "We've heard your side, Alfred. Your attorney presented it. The problem is that your side doesn't have supporting documentation, and June's does. That's not bias, that's evidence." Alfred's jaw tightened. He said, "You're going to regret this, all of you." Then he walked out of the conference room, his lawyer scrambling to gather papers and follow. After they left, the 3 remaining board members looked at me. Linda Morehouse said, "That was handled well, June. I know this can't have been easy, separating personal and professional like this, but you did the right thing bringing it to us officially." Harold Patterson agreed. Your father would be proud. He built this company on integrity, and you're protecting that. Whatever happens with the personal situation, the business is solid. David Chen added, if you need character references or client statements supporting the company's reputation, let me know. I'll make some calls. I thanked them, feeling a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down after they left. I'd been so afraid they'd question my judgment, my motives, my ability to lead. Instead, they'd backed me up, believed me, seen the evidence and drawn the obvious conclusions. That night, I sat alone in the house, eating takeout directly from the container, too tired to bother with plates. My phone rang. It was Mark. He said, "How did it go?" I said, "Better than I expected. The board supported the decision. Alfred walked out, but his lawyer didn't fight very hard. I think they know they don't have a case." Mark said, "Good. That means we're in a strong position for the separation agreement. Alfred's lawyer will probably reach out in the next few days wanting to negotiate. They'll try to minimize the financial repayment and maximize his share of marital assets. But we've got the documentation and the board's backing. We can hold firm." I said, "What if he tries to drag this out? Make it ugly?" Mark said, "Then it gets ugly. But you'll win. It'll just take longer and cost more. My guess is he'll settle within 3 months. His lawyer knows the numbers don't work in his favor." The weeks that followed were a blur of legal motions, financial disclosures, and negotiation meetings. Alfred moved out of the house entirely, took an apartment across town near Bill Norris. That detail came out in discovery when his lawyer had to disclose his current address. So they were still together apparently, still playing house while I cleaned up the wreckage. I tried not to think about it, tried not to wonder what Alfred had told Bill about me, what story he'd spun to make himself the victim. It didn't matter. What mattered was protecting the business, protecting the house, and getting through this with my dignity intact. By mid-April, we'd reached a preliminary settlement. Alfred would relinquish all claims to the house, except a buyout of his remaining shares in Luther Corp at fair market value, minus the $400,000 in misappropriated funds, and agree to a formal separation that could be converted to divorce after the mandatory waiting period. He'd keep his hidden savings account and his retirement accounts, but he wouldn't get any portion of mine. The terms weren't generous, but they were fair. More fair than Alfred deserved, honestly. But Mark advised me to take the deal. "You could fight for more," he said, "but it would take another year and cost you twice as much in legal fees. This way, you're free. You keep the business, you keep the house, and you close this chapter. Sometimes winning isn't about getting everything. It's about getting what matters and moving on." I signed the agreement on a Friday afternoon in May, sitting in Mark's office with the windows open and spring air blowing through. Alfred signed separately with his lawyer, so I didn't have to see him. The whole thing felt anticlimactic. 38 years of marriage reduced to signatures on legal documents. Mark walked me to my car afterward, stood there in the parking lot with his hands in his pockets. He said, "How are you doing? Really?" I thought about it. I said, "I'm tired. I'm relieved. I'm angry and sad and grateful all at once. But I'm okay. I think I'm going to be okay." He smiled, said, "You're more than okay, June. You're free. And that's worth more than you realize right now." Summer came slowly. I threw myself into work, restructured some departments, promoted a couple of younger employees who'd been overlooked during Alfred's tenure. Carol retired finally at 69, and I threw her a party in the conference room with cake and champagne and speeches about her decades of service. She pulled me aside afterward and said, "Your father would be proud of how you handled all this. I know it wasn't easy, but you did it right." I hugged her, feeling tears prick my eyes for the first time in months. I said, "I couldn't have done it without you. You kept the records. You saw what I didn't want to see." She patted my hand, said, "Someone had to look out for you." By August, the house felt like mine again. I repainted the guest room, got rid of Alfred's old furniture, bought new curtains, spent Sundays working in the garden, something I hadn't had time for in years. The tomatoes came in heavy that summer, fat red globes that tasted like childhood. I made sauce and froze it in containers, enough to last through winter. The rhythm of ordinary life felt healing. No drama, no lawyers, no late-night arguments, just quiet mornings with coffee and the newspaper, evenings with books and old movies. I started having dinner once a week with Linda Morehouse, who'd become a real friend through all this. We'd sit at her kitchen table or mine, drink wine, talk about business and life and the strange resilience of women who refuse to stay down. One evening in September, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Bill Norris. His voice was tentative, young. He said, "Mrs. Smith, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for my part in what happened. I was young and stupid, and I let myself get manipulated, and I know that's not an excuse, but I'm sorry anyway." I was silent for a moment, processing. Then I said, "Why are you calling me now?" "It's been 6 months." He hesitated, said, "Because Alfred and I broke up, and I realized some things about him, about how he operates. I think I understand now what he did to you, and I wanted you to know that I'm sorry I was part of that." I sat down on the porch steps, phone pressed to my ear, watching the sun set behind the neighbor's oak tree. I said, "What did you realize?" Bill sighed, said, "That he was using me the same way he used you, for money, for status, for someone to make him feel important. When his money ran out and he couldn't afford the lifestyle anymore, he started getting mean. Started blaming me for the divorce, for the loss of his position at the company. Said I'd ruined his life by being careless, but we weren't careless. He set it up so you'd find us. I think part of him wanted to get caught, because he was tired of pretending, and he wanted you to be the one to end it so he could play victim." That made sense in a sick kind of way. Alfred had always needed to be the wronged party, the misunderstood hero. He couldn't just leave. That would make him the bad guy. But if I left him, if I kicked him out, then he could tell everyone he'd been unfairly persecuted for one mistake, that I was vindictive and cold. It was all calculated, even the affair, even the getting caught. I said to Bill, "I appreciate you calling. I'm not sure it changes anything, but I appreciate it." He said, "I know. I just didn't want you to think I didn't care about the damage I caused. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing, standing up for yourself. I wish I'd been brave enough to do that." After we hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the light fade and the stars come out. Felt something shift inside me, like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying finally lifting. Bill's apology didn't fix anything, but it confirmed what I'd needed to know, that I hadn't been crazy, hadn't been overreacting, hadn't been the villain in this story. Alfred had orchestrated his own downfall, and I'd simply refused to go down with him. That wasn't revenge. That was survival. The divorce was finalized in November, one day before Thanksgiving. I took myself out to dinner that night, sat alone at a nice restaurant downtown, ordered steak and a good bottle of wine, toasted myself quietly, felt ridiculous and liberated at the same time. The waiter asked if I was celebrating something. I said, "New beginnings." He smiled, said congratulations, brought me a complimentary dessert. I ate it slowly, savoring every bite, feeling like I'd earned it. When I got home, the house was dark and quiet. I turned on the lights, room by room, until the whole place glowed. My house, my space, my life. No one to answer to, no one to tiptoe around, no one to drain my accounts or lie to my face. Just me and the future, wide open. December brought the holidays. I spent Christmas with Linda Morehouse and her family, helped cook dinner, played board games with her grandkids. It was warm and chaotic, and nothing like the formal, tense holidays I'd endured with Alfred for years. On New Year's Eve, I stayed home, watched the ball drop on TV, drank champagne alone on the couch. When the clock struck midnight, I raised my glass to the empty room and said out loud, "To second chances." It felt good, felt true. By January, I'd settled into a new normal. Mornings at the office, lunch with colleagues, evenings at home with books or quiet dinners with friends. I joined a book club at the library, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Met women my age who had their own stories of survival and reinvention. We talked about books, but we also talked about life, divorces, difficult children, aging parents, health scares, financial worries, unexpected joys, the ordinary struggles that make up a real life. No one tried to fix each other. We just listened. It was enough. Mark called me one afternoon in February, a year after the board meeting. He said, "I'm in town next week for a case. Want to grab dinner?" I said yes before I could second-guess myself. We met at a small Italian place neither of us had been to before. Sat across from each other in a corner booth, splitting a bottle of wine, talking about everything and nothing. The conversation was easy, familiar, like picking up a thread we'd dropped 40 years ago. At some point, he reached across the table and took my hand, said, "I'm glad you called me that day. I'm glad I got to be part of this, part of you getting free." I squeezed his hand, said, "I'm glad too." We didn't rush into anything, didn't make promises or plans, just started seeing each other when his work brought him to town, which was more often than it used to be. He'd stay at a hotel, and we'd have dinner, go to a movie, walk through the park on Sunday mornings. It was companionship without pressure, affection without ownership, the kind of relationship I'd needed but never had with Alfred. Mark understood that I'd been burned, understood that trust was something I'd have to rebuild slowly. He didn't push, just showed up, consistently, kindly, without expectations. It was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. By spring, I felt lighter, like I'd shed a skin I'd been living in for decades. The business was thriving. We'd brought in 2 major new clients and expanded into a new market. The employees were happier, more productive, more willing to innovate. Without Alfred's negativity and entitlement dragging everyone down, the whole culture had shifted. People smiled more, offered ideas without fear of being dismissed, took pride in their work because they knew it mattered. I realized that I'd been managing around Alfred's toxicity for so long that I'd forgotten what a healthy workplace felt like. Now I remembered, and I wasn't going back. The house had become a sanctuary. I'd redecorated slowly, room by room, replacing Alfred's heavy furniture with lighter pieces, adding plants and artwork I loved. The guest room became a library, lined with bookshelves I'd built with Linda's help one Saturday. The garage became a workspace where I could refinish old furniture I found at estate sales, small projects that brought joy without pressure. The garden bloomed extravagantly that summer, roses and lilies and tall stalks of hollyhocks that brushed against the windows. I sat on the porch most evenings, watching the light change, feeling grateful for the quiet. One afternoon in July, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a short handwritten note from Alfred. It said, "I know it's too late for apologies, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I've thought a lot about what happened, and I realize now that I took you for granted. You deserved better. I'm working on being a better person, but I know that doesn't change the past. I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. You earned it." I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. Didn't respond. Didn't need to. Whatever Alfred was working through, it was his journey. Mine was already well underway. By the time fall came around again, I'd stopped thinking about Alfred altogether, except in practical terms. Tax documents, occasional business filings that still required both our signatures until the final company buyout cleared. He was part of my past, but he wasn't part of my present. That felt like victory enough. I'd survived betrayal, financial abuse, public humiliation, and months of legal wrangling. I'd protected my father's legacy, stood up for myself, and rebuilt a life that felt authentic and mine. No one could take that from me. Not Alfred, not gossip, not doubt. I'd done the work, made the hard choices, and come out the other side standing. That was more than revenge. That was reclaiming myself. And here's what I learned through all of it. Betrayal doesn't break you unless you let it. The first betrayal is what someone does to you. The second betrayal is what you do to yourself by staying, by making excuses, by accepting less than you deserve because you're afraid of being alone or starting over or facing judgment. I'd been guilty of that second betrayal for years, but when I finally chose myself, when I finally said enough, I discovered something powerful. I discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for, that I could make hard decisions and live with the consequences, that I could stand alone without falling apart, that I could rebuild a life from scratch and make it better than before. That's not something anyone can give you. You have to claim it yourself. These days, I wake up without dread. I go to work without walking on eggshells. I come home to a house that feels like peace instead of performance. I have friends who know the real me, not the version I performed to keep everyone comfortable. I have a relationship with Mark that's built on respect and honesty instead of need and convenience. I have a business that's thriving and employees who feel valued. I have a bank account that's mine and a future that's open. I have my dignity back. Some people might think that's not enough, that I should have gotten more in the divorce, that I should have destroyed Alfred completely, but they don't understand. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to stop letting him destroy me. And the moment I did that, I won. So when people ask me now how I'm doing, I tell them the truth. I'm doing well. Better than well. I'm free. And freedom, it turns out, is worth more than any settlement, any revenge, any vindication. It's worth more than 38 years of pretending. It's worth the hard conversations and the legal bills and the lonely nights and the fear of starting over. Because on the other side of all that pain is something beautiful, a life that's yours, a life you chose, a life where you wake up each morning knowing you kept your promises to yourself. That's not just survival, that's triumph, and I earned every single moment of it. Thanks for watching until the end. If this story touched you, please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. As a final reminder, this was a fictional dramatization for entertainment purposes only, and does not constitute legal, medical, or financial advice. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you in the next story.